One of the things that I think is just really important as a practitioner is thinking practically about some of these dynamics and the context in which you're negotiating. Obviously, the deal size and the relative size and leverage of the negotiating parties is going to be a really big deal. The maturity of each party is going to matter. Kathleen talked a little bit about the TOMs. I think that that's something that's really important. If you're dealing with a really large organization, they may have a TOMS that they want you to agree to. And it becomes a question of like, can I operationalize this? What is reasonable? Is their TOMS out of date? Maybe especially some of the larger organizations, we sometimes see TOMS that you're like, that's not even really like current practice. My favorite is when I get a requirement to destroy paper by sending it to the shredder. And I know that there are still people who use paper, but just thinking really practically about some of these sorts of things, I think is really important as we're thinking about negotiating these things. And sort of taking a reasonableness approach, like what is the data? Val was talking a little bit about the example with a webinar. What data is being exchanged? Is it really sensitive personal data? Is it your business name and email address? And sort of consider a sliding scale when you're thinking about these things. Maybe if you're doing a deal with a vendor that's going to have health data, you really are committed to getting really tight toms and commitments from those folks, because ultimately you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. But maybe it's a standard SaaS vendor where all they're really getting is business name and email address. And while that's still personal data and you should have a DPA that's appropriately allocating the risk, maybe it's a lower risk proposition than the PHI. I do see a question. Could we elaborate on the key considerations that differ between B2B and B2C contexts? Yes. So ultimately, my primary experience is in B2B, but I do find that when I'm negotiating, if it is a vendor or a customer who has a lot of B2C experience, some of the concepts that they get really stuck on are less relevant in a B2B situation. I think that when you're thinking about a B2B negotiation, the risk, again, getting back to sort of those practical risk allocation matters, the risk is a little bit lower because if you think about sort of what the regulators are targeting currently, it's a lot of consumer facing businesses. And so I think that the stakes are just higher if you're in a consumer facing business. Ultimately, can you operationalize the process that you're committing to or that your customer is asking you to commit to? Sometimes when we're negotiating these things, it ends up in particular, if you're on counterparty paper, in particular, I find it with the TOMs, right? Is like, do I have to create a business process just for this particular customer or just for this particular relationship in order to live into the commitments that this person wants? Or can we find a middle ground where we're meeting the needs and the requirements of the law based on the data and all of that, the sort of those sliding risk scales that we talked about, but that I can also operationalize without having to go build a whole one-off process that's probably manual, that's probably difficult to maintain, and sort of, what are the trade-offs here that we can find that sort of lands in a place where I can live into the commitments, do right by the customer or the vendor, live into the relationship, but also manage my business.